So it seems like all it would take for young Earth creationism to really take off, all we've got to do is find, a human skeleton inside a T Rex or something like that to show that, hey, dinosaurs and humans lived together, and then case closed, everybody becomes a young Earth creationist after that. It's probably not that simple, even if that did happen. But you get the idea. You would expect maybe someone would expect that we would see a lot of those. Can you speak into this issue of the fossil distribution? Why don't we see human fossils right next to dinosaur fossils? That kind of thing. Could you speak about that a little bit?
Yeah, and Stephen, you bring up a good challenge to young Earth creationists' understanding of geology. It's a common one, and it's a common one for a reason, right? There isn't a direct, straightforward rebuttal to it. We don't have that human being in a T-Rex skeleton. I think it was Haldane who was once asked what would, cause him to believe in a global flood in young Earth creationism, and he said, "Yeah, rabbits in the Cambrian." And Cambrian, for your readers and for your viewers, I should say, if we think of all the rocks that have visible fossils in them, we call that the Phanerozoic rocks. It actually means visible life. So if you're thinking of things like clams and trilobites up through T-Rex and through Ice Age mammals, that's the column here. And there's lots of subdivisions in it, and they all have names and things like Cretaceous and Jurassic and Triassic. Those three make up the Mesozoic, the age of reptiles, so to speak. We're used to hearing about those because there's all sorts of movies about dinosaurs. We don't have movies about what's going on too much in the Cambrian, which is mostly shelly things like trilobites and clams, etc. Ice Age mammals are up towards the very, very top, right next to human beings. They're together, for example. So the challenge is, if the flood made some or most or all of that geological column, I would say at least from the Cambrian, actually a little below, up through the end of the dinosaurs, and then we've got some debates as to how much into the mammals that goes. You know, if you were to find human fossils in that package of what we think are flood rocks, that would be a very helpful argument for young Earth creationists. And despite the fact that you go on the internet, you're going to be able to find people who have made claims about, human skeletons being found at certain sites, or bells or other sorts of iron brass works that have been found in coal seams. None of those have been documented well. A good number of them are hoaxes. If you see a picture of a skeleton that's being excavated by a human skeleton's being excavated by a whole bunch of paleontologists, like, hey, this proves there were giants. I know all those photographs. They all started off, strangely enough, as a visual competition when Photoshop was a new program, and they leaked out onto the internet early on and have just persisted with us forever. Like I can even identify some of the paleontologists or the archaeologists who are there. It's like, oh yeah, that's a famous human skeleton. It's been blown up to 30 feet long or whatever. So, those things, that's not legitimate. That's not good stuff. If you see that on Facebook, just keep scrolling or stop scrolling entirely. But how come we don't have human beings in other things? Well, in some of the answer is going to deal with at least in my opinion, the way in which Noah's flood advances over the continental lands, and what sequence and order it begins to bury things. As it starts to bury things in oceans, as ocean environments are being disrupted by the early waves of the flood, being covered over with sediment, you're going to get ocean life. You're not going to get humans in with trilobites and clams and things like that, because they don't live anywhere near one another in a lateral position, right? Geographically, they're not the same. Another reason why Haldane, when he says rabbits in the Cambrian would do it for him, right? That would force him to change his mind. Well, unless Noah was out there chucking the rabbits overboard, I'm not going to expect that there's going to be rabbits in with these, deep ocean types of creatures, because they don't live anywhere near one another. So, but we still have, okay, what about higher up? Once you get into the more terrestrial rocks, the rocks that are the terrestrial environments that are being destroyed and buried by the flood, and we still don't see humans in with, say, dinosaur fossils there. And that is a challenge. I do think that dinosaurs and humans lived at the same time as a young Earth creationist. They were both created on days 5 and 6. Some of the dinosaurs might have, broadly speaking, got things like pterosaurs and marine reptiles. Those are not dinosaurs, but formed on day 5. You got land-dwelling dinosaurs that are on day 6, along with human beings. Now, the fact that they were created at the same time doesn't necessarily mean that they were living in the same places. So it could be that the ecosystems that include dinosaurs, not only do they not include humans, they don't include a lot of other modern mammalian stuff. There's no modern mammals found along with them. You might hear creationists every once in a while say, "Oh yeah, well there was this beaver that was found in the Triassic or the Jurassic." It wasn't a beaver. It was a animal that was a mammal, and it was named after beavers simply because it had a big, long, flat tail. This is one thing that I've seen a lot with some recent creationist books that have been saying it's, museum hoaxes and or museums covering things up. No, some of these animals are just being described as squirrel-like, beaver-like, but they're not actually beavers and squirrels. They're drastically different types of mammals, and the museums are not hiding this from anybody that got them out. So it's not just humans, it's other sorts of things as well, which is leading me to think that we've got some sort of ecological partitioning or separation between them. Also, one thing that I have to keep in mind is that, the amount of time between Adam and Noah is a fixed amount of time. We can debate whether or not the genealogies are entirely tight or whether there's some flexibility there. If there's no flexibility, then we have somewhere between 1600 and 2300 years, depending if it's a Masoretic text or a Septuagint text, for example. But nonetheless, give or take, 2000 years is the amount of time you have between Adam and Noah. Maybe that it could expand a little bit. I don't know. But that also means that when we start off with two humans as the original couple, there's going to be a certain amount of growth to the human population. And that growth to that human population is going to be quick, but I don't think that it's going to bring you to billions of individuals within 2000 years. We're not talking about populations that can take advantage of petroleum resources and coal and nuclear, reactors and things. The sorts of things that allow us to have 8 billion people on the planet right now are not in place there. And so what was the population of humanity at the time of the flood? I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's only several hundreds of thousands, maybe a few million. You could certainly, you could make the math whatever you want, but that's not our goal. Our goal would be to think about what are the likelihoods. Granted, we're going to have lots of people being born over a long period of time per female, right? We've got people living a long period of time. We also know that by the time we get to Noah's flood, God is condemning the world for the violence within it. The very, first set of children that is born to Adam and Eve, there is murder right out the gate. So, that's going to be a check on the population as well, mortality rates and things like that. So when we're then thinking about the fact that the average thickness of sedimentary rock over top of the continents is about 3 to 5,000 feet, let's just say a mile's worth of sedimentary rock on average across the entire world on all of our continents. And, there's stuff out in the ocean basins as well. How likely is it that you're going to find one out of a few million people? It's going to be incredibly unlikely, actually. So there are some things to think about, humans being a little bit more clever, looking for ways to try to escape, possibly being more successful at doing that than others. But to your question, we don't have a great answer, but we do have some reasons to think of why this could be the case. We have some reasons in terms of population size, in terms of distribution in the rocks, in terms of ecology, and in terms of the escapability of human beings, which means that they would be destroyed later in the flood. More of the sediment had been laid down. Their bodies would be floating out and being consumed by things like fish and the like. So I'd say our likelihood of finding human beings in the fossil record is actually quite low to begin with, but I would still love to see one.
Yeah.
That would be big. Or some of these other types of creatures that are associated with us in the modern world, or at least in what I think is some of the sediments of the post-flood world. I'd like to see some representatives there. Dr. Kurt Wise, who you mentioned, he's talked a little bit about this as well. So we have some ideas, but it is something that is still, I think, a legitimate critique to be lodged against young Earth creationism. And I think it's important for us as young Earth creationists to be willing to say, yeah, that is a good argument. And not to say for every argument that comes our way, oh, well, I've got an answer for that. And it's, silly for you to even ask. That's not a good posture, I think, just in terms of Christian humility first, but also for me as a scientist, like there's a lot of unknowns out there. And it's good to be able to say that somebody else has a good point, has a strong argument. And I like to say that a lot because it means that if I turn around and then say, well, I think I've got a good argument for something, hopefully people would, put a little more weight into that because I was willing to say that, yeah, I don't have a good answer for that, or that is a good counter argument. That's the sort of gracious way of interacting with somebody that's going to build some rapport. And probably some of what helped change your mind was seeing people not just say, oh, that argument doesn't work, that argument doesn't work. And if somebody always has an answer for everything all the time, you start to wonder whether, there's that part in your brain that's go, I don't know, it seems too good to be true.
If you enjoyed the honesty of Dr. Ross in this video, you might really enjoy listening to him lay out a case for a young Earth that has some secular scientists scrambling for an explanation. And you can watch that video here.